History is rarely changed by the biggest decisions. More often, it turns on the smallest things that almost nobody notices. More than a century after the Titanic disappeared beneath the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, countless books, documentaries, and investigations have tried to answer the same haunting question: why did the world's most famous ocean liner meet such a devastating fate on its very first voyage? Some point to the iceberg. Others blame excessive speed, overconfidence, weather conditions, or human judgment. But hidden beneath all those familiar explanations is a detail so ordinary that it almost feels impossible to take seriously. It wasn't a massive engineering failure. It wasn't a secret mechanical defect. It wasn't even a dramatic act of fate. It was a missing pair of binoculars. At first glance, the idea sounds almost absurd. Could one forgotten piece of equipment really have influenced the course of one of history's greatest maritime disasters? Or has this story grown larger over time simply because people naturally search for a single moment they can point to whenever tragedy strikes? The answer is far more complicated than either side usually admits. Because this is not simply the story of an object that failed to reach its destination. It is the story of a decision made days before the Titanic ever left Southampton. A decision so routine that no one involved could have imagined it would later become part of one of history's most debated mysteries. Somewhere between paperwork, last-minute personnel changes, and the controlled routines of a brand new ship preparing for its maiden voyage, one small oversight quietly slipped into history without anyone noticing. No alarms sounded. No warnings were issued. Life aboard the ship continued exactly as expected. The passengers admired the luxurious interiors. Crew members focused on their responsibilities. Engineers trusted the newest technology of their time. Everything appeared to be unfolding according to plan. Yet history has a remarkable habit of revealing the importance of details only after they can no longer be changed. That is what makes this mystery so compelling. It is not really about binoculars. It is about the uncomfortable possibility that enormous consequences sometimes emerge from ordinary moments that seem completely insignificant at the time. Modern investigations continue to revisit this forgotten detail, not because it offers an easy answer, but because it forces us to ask a far more unsettling question. If the binoculars had been available when the lookouts climbed into the crow's nest that cold April night, would anything have unfolded differently? Could the iceberg have been spotted sooner? Would the officers have had enough time to react? Or are we simply trying to simplify a disaster that was shaped by dozens of interconnected decisions rather than a single missing object? Before we can answer any of those questions, we first need to understand what those binoculars actually were, why they never reached the men who were expected to use them, and how one forgotten key became one of the most enduring mysteries in the story of the Titanic. To understand why that forgotten detail would matter at all, we have to step back several days before the voyage reached the North Atlantic. Long before the cold night that would define the ship's legacy, everything about this vessel had been designed around one idea: confidence. She represented the newest thinking in passenger travel, combining remarkable size, advanced engineering, and a belief that careful planning could overcome nearly any challenge the ocean presented. Every department had procedures. Every officer had responsibilities. Every watch was carefully organized. Nothing about the operation suggested carelessness. The men assigned to keep watch from the crow's nest were among the most important eyes aboard the ship. From nearly 100 feet above the waterline, they scanned the horizon hour after hour, searching for anything that might require the attention of the bridge. Their task demanded patience more than excitement. most watches passed quietly. Endless stretches of dark water offered little to see except distant stars, changing weather, or the occasional vessel on the horizon. Yet everyone understood that a single observation, made at exactly the right moment, could protect thousands of lives. The technology available in 1912 was impressive for its time, but it still depended on people. Electric lights illuminated much of the ship, wireless operators communicated across hundreds of miles, and experienced officers relied on charts, compasses, and years of seamanship. Still, when it came to avoiding danger ahead, there was no substitute for human judgment. Someone had to recognize a threat before anyone else could respond. During daylight, visibility often stretched for miles across the open Atlantic. At night, however, everything changed. The ocean became an enormous field of darkness where distance was difficult to judge and familiar landmarks disappeared entirely. Lookouts learned to notice subtle differences rather than obvious ones. A faint shadow. An unusual reflection. A break in the pattern of waves. Sometimes the first sign of danger was not seeing an object at all, but noticing the absence of something expected. Experienced seamen understood that calm water around floating ice could appear strangely smooth, almost unnatural, beneath a clear sky. Those were the kinds of details that demanded constant concentration, even after hours of standing in the cold wind. Contrary to what many people imagine today, binoculars were not considered magical devices that instantly revealed every hazard. Professional sailors debated how useful they actually were for spotting nearby obstacles during nighttime watches. Wide, unobstructed vision often mattered just as much as magnification. Even so, binoculars remained valuable equipment under many conditions, especially for examining distant objects whose shapes were difficult to identify. They were another tool available to trained observers, not a replacement for skill or experience. That distinction would later become critically important. Because before we can ask whether their absence changed anything, we first have to understand why the men assigned to that lonely platform climbed into position without them in the first place. The answer was not found in the freezing Atlantic. It began days earlier, on land, with an unexpected personnel change, an overlooked locker, and a key that quietly left the ship before she ever sailed. The chain of events began not in the middle of the Atlantic, but during the final preparations before departure. As White Star Line completed routine staffing assignments, one officer received unexpected orders that quietly changed the ship's command structure. His name was David Blair, and until the last moment he had been assigned as the second officer for the maiden voyage. Then, only days before sailing, the company decided to replace him with another experienced officer, Charles Lightoller, whose recent availability made him the preferred choice for the position. Personnel changes like this were not unheard of in commercial shipping. Steamship companies frequently reassigned officers to balance experience across their fleets. There was nothing dramatic about the decision, and no one involved had any reason to believe it would become part of one of history's most discussed maritime stories. Blair gathered his personal belongings, completed his departure, and left the ship before she cast off from Southampton. Yet somewhere during that routine transition, one small detail remained behind unnoticed. Among the items associated with his duties was a key that unlocked a storage locker containing equipment intended for use by the lookouts. At the time, no one realized the key had left the vessel with him. No emergency followed. No frantic search delayed the departure. The ship sailed on schedule, carrying more than 2,000 passengers and crew across the Atlantic exactly as planned. Only later would investigators learn that the locker remained locked throughout the voyage. The existence of that locker has become one of the most debated details surrounding the disaster. Contemporary accounts and later testimony indicate that binoculars intended for the crow's nest were stored inside. Because the key was unavailable, the equipment could not be retrieved during the crossing. What seems straightforward today was far less obvious to the people on board. The lookout simply reported for duty and carried out their responsibilities with the resources available to them. There is no evidence that they refused their assignment or argued that they could not perform it. They had experience, discipline, and confidence in their own observation skills. In fact, many professional sailors of the era believed that careful eyesight often mattered more than magnification when searching for hazards at night. That historical context is important because it prevents us from turning a complicated situation into a simple legend. It would be easy to imagine someone discovering the missing key, sounding an alarm, and declaring that the voyage could not continue without the equipment. Nothing like that appears in the historical record. Instead, the oversight blended into the countless routine details that accompany any major operation. Only after the tragedy did people begin looking backward, searching every decision, every conversation, and every forgotten object for clues that might explain how events unfolded. The missing key became one of those clues. Not because anyone could immediately prove what difference it made, but because it represented something every person understands. We have all experienced the moment when an ordinary oversight suddenly seems significant only after circumstances have changed. The challenge for historians is separating emotional hindsight from documented evidence. Before deciding whether this forgotten key altered history, we must first reconstruct the conditions the lookouts actually faced during the final hours before the collision, because the environment surrounding them would prove just as important as anything locked inside that storage locker. By the evening of April 14, 1912, the voyage had settled into a rhythm that felt almost routine. The Atlantic was calm, the engines maintained their steady pace, and the confidence that had surrounded the ship since her departure remained largely unchanged. Throughout the day, wireless operators received several messages from other vessels reporting the presence of sea ice farther west. Some of those warnings reached the bridge and were taken into consideration. Others were delayed as the wireless room balanced navigational traffic with the growing number of personal messages sent by passengers. None of this suggested that disaster was inevitable. Ships crossing the North Atlantic encountered ice every season, and experienced officers had navigated similar conditions before. As darkness settled over the ocean, however, the environment began to change in subtle ways that would later become central to every investigation. There was almost no moonlight to illuminate the horizon. The sea itself appeared unusually calm, lacking the rolling waves that often broke against the base of floating ice and made obstacles easier to detect from a distance. Instead, the water stretched outward like polished black glass, reflecting stars with remarkable clarity while revealing almost nothing of what lay ahead. High above the deck, the two lookouts reported for duty and climbed into the crow's nest. Their assignment was straightforward but demanding. For hours they would scan the darkness without interruption, relying on disciplined observation rather than certainty. Every passing minute required the same level of concentration as the one before it. Fatigue, cold temperatures, and endless darkness could easily dull the senses, yet there was no room for complacency. Somewhere beyond the limits of visible light, the ocean concealed whatever waited in the ship's path. It is easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to imagine that everyone aboard somehow sensed danger approaching. The historical record suggests something very different. Passengers continued their evening routines. Conversations filled the public rooms. Crew members carried out familiar responsibilities. Engineers monitored the machinery deep within the ship. Officers rotated through scheduled watches on the bridge. To those living the moment, this was simply another peaceful night at sea. That ordinary atmosphere is precisely what makes the coming events so difficult to comprehend. History rarely announces the exact minute when an ordinary evening becomes unforgettable. Then, shortly before midnight, the routine ended. A dark shape slowly separated itself from the darkness ahead. It did not suddenly appear like something from a motion picture. Instead, it gradually became distinguishable against the night sky until recognition arrived almost simultaneously with urgency. The lookout immediately reacted, signaling the bridge and reporting what he had seen. Officers responded within moments, issuing commands intended to avoid the obstacle. Every trained member of the bridge team acted according to procedures developed through years of maritime experience. Yet the available distance was measured not in comfortable miles, but in rapidly disappearing seconds. More than a century later, historians still examine those final moments frame by frame, asking whether anything could have increased the amount of time available for those decisions. That question does not begin with the collision itself. It begins several minutes earlier, in the invisible space between detection and recognition, where one of the most enduring debates in maritime history continues to unfold. Once investigators reconstructed the timeline, attention naturally shifted from what happened to what might have happened differently. This is where the discussion becomes far more complicated than popular retellings often suggest. It is tempting to imagine a simple chain of cause and effect. If binoculars had been available, the iceberg would have been seen sooner. If it had been seen sooner, the officers would have had more time. If they had more time, the ship might have avoided the collision altogether. It is an appealing narrative because it offers clarity. Unfortunately, history is rarely that straightforward. Maritime experts have debated this question for decades, and the evidence points in several directions rather than one. Some experienced seamen have argued that binoculars could have helped identify an object at a greater distance under certain conditions, especially if the observer already suspected something unusual on the horizon. Others have reached almost the opposite conclusion. At night, they argue, binoculars narrow the field of vision and can actually slow the detection of unexpected hazards. A lookout constantly scanning a wide horizon may notice subtle movement more effectively with the unaided eye than while concentrating through magnified lenses. Historical testimony reflects this disagreement. Several experienced officers from the era stated that lookouts traditionally relied on natural eyesight during nighttime watches. Magnification was useful for identifying distant ships, navigation lights, or objects already detected, but not necessarily for discovering an unlit obstacle emerging from darkness. That distinction is often lost in modern discussions, where binoculars are imagined as a technological solution capable of overcoming every environmental limitation. Yet the conditions that night were unusually difficult regardless of equipment. The sea was exceptionally calm, leaving almost no white water breaking against the base of the floating ice. The moon provided little illumination. The dark mass ahead blended into an equally dark horizon until its outline gradually separated from the night itself. Even perfect vision could not create contrast where almost none existed. This does not mean the missing equipment was irrelevant. It means its true impact cannot be isolated from every other factor. Ship speed, weather, visibility, communication, navigation decisions, and human reaction all interacted within the same rapidly unfolding sequence. Remove any one of those elements, and the outcome might still remain uncertain. That uncertainty is precisely what serious historical investigation demands that we acknowledge. It is also why official inquiries avoided declaring the missing binoculars to be the single decisive cause. They examined procedures, command decisions, ice warnings, and operational practices as parts of a much larger picture rather than reducing the disaster to one forgotten object. Nevertheless, the story refused to disappear. The image of a locked locker and an absent key became a powerful symbol because it transformed an immense historical tragedy into something deeply human. People understand forgotten keys. They understand overlooked details. They understand discovering, too late, that something ordinary suddenly mattered far more than anyone realized. Perhaps that emotional truth explains why this question continues to endure. But emotion alone is not evidence, and before accepting or rejecting the theory, we must examine what the official investigations actually concluded, what witnesses remembered years later, and where those accounts support one another or begin to diverge. When the immediate rescue efforts ended, another kind of journey began. Investigators on both sides of the Atlantic faced a difficult responsibility. Their task was not simply to understand how the disaster unfolded, but to determine whether it could have been prevented. Public attention focused on countless questions. Why had the ship maintained her speed? How were ice warnings handled? Were existing maritime regulations sufficient? Among those many subjects, the missing binoculars gradually emerged as one of the most intriguing details. Testimony gathered during the official inquiries confirmed that the lookouts did not have access to the binoculars stored aboard the ship because the locker remained locked after the key had inadvertently left with David Blair. That point was never seriously disputed. The real disagreement centered on what that fact actually meant. Historical investigations are strongest when they separate confirmed evidence from interpretation, and this case is an excellent example of why that distinction matters. The evidence establishes that the binoculars were unavailable. It also establishes that experienced lookouts were assigned to the crow's nest and that they detected the iceberg only shortly before officers on the bridge began taking evasive action. Beyond those facts, certainty becomes much more difficult. Witnesses described the environmental conditions in considerable detail. They spoke of an unusually calm sea, a dark horizon, and limited natural contrast between the ice and the surrounding water. Maritime specialists who later analyzed those conditions reached different conclusions. Some believed that magnification could have provided valuable additional seconds by allowing the lookouts to distinguish the shape of the iceberg earlier. Others argued that binoculars would have been used only after something suspicious had already been noticed and therefore would not have significantly changed the initial moment of detection. The official investigations themselves reflected this complexity. Rather than declaring a single cause, they examined a network of contributing factors that included navigation practices, communication procedures, environmental conditions, vessel speed, and organizational decisions. The absence of the binoculars appeared within that broader discussion, but it was never identified as the sole explanation for the tragedy. That restraint is important because it demonstrates the difference between careful investigation and convenient storytelling. Human nature often searches for one decisive mistake because simple explanations provide emotional closure. Real history rarely offers that luxury. Instead, major events usually emerge from several independent circumstances that intersect at precisely the wrong moment. Looking back more than 100 years later, it is easy to believe that everyone should have recognized the significance of one forgotten key. Yet no document from before the voyage suggests that officers considered the situation extraordinary. The oversight became meaningful only after later events transformed an unnoticed detail into an enduring historical symbol. That is why the story continues to fascinate researchers today. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes evidence reveals exactly what happened but cannot tell us with certainty what would have happened instead. The distinction may appear subtle, yet it separates responsible historical investigation from speculation. Even after decades of research, the surviving records still leave room for honest disagreement, and that lingering uncertainty has allowed this overlooked detail to remain part of the Titanic story long after many larger questions seem to find their answers. Over time, the forgotten locker took on a life of its own. What had once been a small detail buried inside official testimony gradually evolved into one of the most recognizable stories associated with the disaster. Articles repeated it. Documentaries highlighted it. Conversations reduced an extraordinarily complex chain of events to a single question that almost everyone could understand. What if the lookouts had simply been given the equipment that was intended for them? The appeal of that question is obvious because it offers something every mystery promises but rarely delivers, the possibility of a single answer. Yet when historians revisit the evidence, they quickly discover that the most popular explanation is not always the strongest one. The theory rests on a reasonable foundation. If magnification allowed the iceberg to be recognized even 30 seconds earlier, those additional moments might have increased the distance available for the officers to react. At the speed the ship was traveling, even a brief amount of extra time translated into hundreds of additional feet. Supporters of this view argue that maritime accidents often depend on narrow margins and that small differences can produce dramatically different outcomes. Their position cannot simply be dismissed because history contains many examples where seconds have altered the course of events. At the same time, critics of the theory point to equally important limitations. Detecting an object and identifying it are not necessarily the same process. A lookout first has to notice something unusual before deciding whether it deserves closer examination. If the iceberg blended almost perfectly into the surrounding darkness, binoculars might not have revealed it any sooner than natural eyesight. In fact, some experienced mariners have argued that constantly scanning through magnified lenses could reduce peripheral awareness and delay the initial detection of unexpected hazards. Both arguments contain elements supported by professional experience, which explains why neither side has ever fully settled the debate. There is another question that receives far less attention but may be just as important. Suppose the iceberg had been spotted slightly earlier. Would the bridge officers have interpreted the situation differently, or would they have responded in essentially the same manner using the information available at that moment? Historical reconstruction cannot answer that with certainty because no surviving document can recreate the exact sequence of human perception, judgment, and reaction that existed on the bridge that night. This is where the mystery becomes more philosophical than mechanical. People naturally search for a single turning point because it makes tragedy easier to comprehend. We prefer stories in which one overlooked detail explains everything else. Reality often refuses to cooperate. Instead of one decisive mistake, history usually presents a chain of ordinary decisions that only appear extraordinary after their consequences become visible. The missing equipment remains part of that chain, but it does not stand alone. Perhaps that is why this debate has endured for more than a century. It challenges two equally powerful instincts: the desire to believe that history could have been changed by one small correction, and the recognition that some events emerge from so many interconnected circumstances that no single explanation can ever fully satisfy us. That tension is what continues to draw researchers back to this seemingly simple question, even after generations of investigation. Imagine rewinding history by less than a minute. Not an hour. Not a day. Just a few seconds added to the timeline before the lookout recognized the dark shape ahead. It is one of the most compelling thought experiments in maritime history because it invites us to believe that enormous consequences sometimes rest on almost invisible margins. If the object had been identified slightly earlier, the officers on the bridge might have had additional time to evaluate the situation. At the ship's cruising speed, even 30 or 40 extra seconds represented several hundred feet of ocean. That distance sounds substantial until it is placed beside a vessel more than 800 feet long, requiring both time and space to respond. This is where the discussion moves beyond history and into the mathematics of motion. Large ships do not react instantly. Every command issued on the bridge must travel through people, machinery, and momentum. Helm orders require execution. Engines require response. The ship itself continues moving forward while every adjustment slowly begins to influence its course. Additional time certainly has value, but no historian can honestly calculate the exact moment at which more time becomes enough. That uncertainty explains why serious researchers avoid claiming that one overlooked detail would certainly have rewritten history. Instead, they examine probabilities. Could the officers have altered the ship's path more effectively? Possibly. Could the iceberg have been identified earlier without changing the eventual outcome? That is also possible. Both conclusions fit within the surviving evidence because neither can be conclusively proven. Yet there is another lesson hidden inside this question, one that extends far beyond a single voyage across the Atlantic. Human beings instinctively search for moments where history appears fragile. We are fascinated by crossroads where one different choice seems capable of producing an entirely different future. Historians sometimes call this contingency, the recognition that events are shaped by countless decisions interacting with circumstances that no individual completely controls. In that sense, the forgotten key has become far more than a maritime curiosity. It has become a symbol of the countless ordinary moments that quietly influence extraordinary outcomes. Every complex event contains details that appear insignificant while they are happening. A routine personnel reassignment. A storage locker left unopened. A calm sea reflecting almost no light. Ice warnings arriving throughout the day. Experienced officers making decisions based on the knowledge available to them. None of those factors alone explains the outcome. Together, they formed a chain that historians continue to study more than 100 years later. Perhaps that is why this story continues to resonate across generations. It reminds us that history is rarely written by dramatic turning points alone. More often, it is shaped by the accumulation of ordinary decisions whose importance becomes visible only in hindsight. The missing equipment remains one link in that chain, neither meaningless nor all-powerful. It occupies a place somewhere between coincidence and consequence, where evidence can guide us only so far before uncertainty inevitably begins. And it is within that uncertain space that the deepest mystery has quietly remained all along. In the end, the most enduring mystery was never locked inside a storage cabinet. It was hidden inside the way we remember history itself. More than 100 years have passed, yet people still return to this single overlooked detail, hoping it might provide the one answer that explains everything else. That desire is understandable. Human beings are uncomfortable with uncertainty. When confronted with a tragedy of enormous scale, we instinctively search for one missing piece that promises to make the entire picture understandable. A forgotten key. An unopened locker. A pair of binoculars that never reached the men expected to use them. those details feel tangible. They offer the comforting illusion that history can be traced to one moment when everything could have gone differently. But the evidence tells a more complicated story. The historical record confirms that the equipment was unavailable. It confirms the personnel change that led to the key leaving the ship. It confirms the environmental conditions described by witnesses and examined during official investigations. Beyond those facts, however, certainty begins to fade. No surviving document can prove exactly when the iceberg would have been recognized under different circumstances. No experiment can recreate every variable that existed on that calm April night. No historian can honestly state that one additional observation, one different decision, or one extra minute would have guaranteed a different ending. That does not weaken the story. In many ways, it makes it stronger. Because the real lesson is not about whether one object changed history. It is about how history itself is formed. Great events rarely emerge from a single cause. They are built from countless ordinary decisions, routine procedures, environmental conditions, human judgments, and unpredictable circumstances that quietly converge until one irreversible moment changes everything. Looking backward, those separate threads appear connected. Looking forward, they would have seemed entirely ordinary. Perhaps that is why this story continues to resonate across generations. Every person has experienced a moment when an insignificant detail suddenly carried unexpected importance. A conversation remembered too late. A decision that seemed routine. A forgotten item that only became meaningful after events had already unfolded. We recognize ourselves in those moments, which is why this century-old maritime mystery still feels surprisingly personal. So the question that remains is no longer whether the lookouts should have had binoculars. The deeper question is why we continue searching for one perfect explanation when history so often refuses to provide one. Maybe the greatest mystery is not what was missing aboard that ship, but why we believe every tragedy must have a single answer waiting to be discovered. The evidence suggests something more challenging. Sometimes history does not leave us with certainty. Sometimes it leaves us with carefully documented facts, competing interpretations, and questions that remain open because the evidence cannot carry us any farther. In those moments, the most responsible conclusion is also the most honest one. We know what happened. We know many of the circumstances that led to it. But whether one forgotten detail could truly have changed the course of history is something we may never know with complete confidence, and perhaps that enduring uncertainty is the reason this story has never stopped asking us to look a little closer.